When your grandmother counted every penny twice and still needed to feed 8 hungry mouths, she didn't scroll through fancy recipe apps or order takeout. She knew secrets that today's families have forgotten. Meals that stretched $1 into a week's worth of dinners and turned scraps into feasts. These weren't just recipes. They were survival skills disguised as comfort food. Let's rediscover the forgotten meals that kept entire generations alive when times were tough and budgets were tighter than bark on a tree. Flour and water pancakes. Back when flour cost more than gold and eggs were a luxury, mothers discovered that flour, water, and a pinch of salt could become breakfast for 6 kids. These thin pancakes cooked fast on a hot griddle, filling bellies when the cupboard was nearly bare. The trick was getting the batter just right, thin enough to spread, but thick enough to hold together. Smart cooks added a tiny bit of baking powder if they had it, or let the batter sit overnight to develop natural bubbles. Kids would fight over who got the crispy edges, and mothers learned to make extra, because these disappeared faster than summer rain. The best part? You could eat them plain, sprinkle on a bit of sugar if you were lucky, or roll them up with whatever jam was left in the jar. These pancakes taught families that sometimes the simplest ingredients could create the most cherished memories. Stone soup with vegetables. The old fairy tale became reality when families literally started with stones to make dinner. A smooth, clean stone went into the pot with water. Then neighbors would contribute whatever they could spare. A carrot here, an onion there, maybe some leftover meat scraps. The stone never added flavor, but it gave families hope and brought communities together during the hardest times. This soup proved that sharing made everyone's meal better than going hungry alone. The magic wasn't in the stone, it was in how desperation brought out the best in people. Children believed the stone made the soup special, and maybe it did, not through magic, but through the love and cooperation it inspired. Each pot of stone soup was different because it depended on what the neighborhood could contribute that day. Some days it was thin and watery, other days it was thick with vegetables and surprisingly filling. The lesson went beyond cooking. It taught that asking for help wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. Newspaper bread. During the Great Depression, when yeast was expensive and ovens were scarce, families baked bread wrapped in wet newspaper. The paper kept the bread moist while it cooked in makeshift ovens or buried in coals. This bread was dense and heavy, but it filled hungry bellies and lasted for days without going stale. The newspaper method meant families could bake bread even without proper baking pans or fancy equipment. Children thought it was magic, watching their mothers wrap dough in newspaper and pull out warm bread hours later. The bread had a unique flavor from the slow, moist cooking process, and families learned to slice it thin to make it last longer. Smart cooks saved the newspaper afterward, drying it out to use again for the next loaf. This bread became a symbol of making do with what you had and finding creative solutions when traditional methods weren't available. It proved that determination and creativity could turn the most basic ingredients into sustenance that kept families together and fed. Fried green tomatoes with cornmeal. When the garden was full of green tomatoes that wouldn't ripen before the first frost, smart families turned them into dinner instead of letting them rot. Thick slices of green tomatoes got coated in cornmeal and fried in whatever fat was available. Lard, bacon grease, or even butter if times were good. The cornmeal created a crispy crust that locked in the tart flavor of the unripe tomatoes. This dish could be a side, a main course, or even breakfast when served with eggs. Families learned that green tomatoes were actually more nutritious than ripe ones, packed with vitamins that kept them healthy through long winters. The secret was slicing them thick enough to hold together, but thin enough to cook through. Some cooks added a little flour to the cornmeal to make the coating stick better. Children who turned their noses up at regular vegetables would gobble up these crispy treats. The best part was that green tomatoes were essentially free if you had a garden, making this a meal that cost almost nothing but delivered maximum flavor and nutrition. Salmon patties from canned fish. A single can of salmon could feed a family of 6 when mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, and onions, then formed into patties and fried until golden. These patties were crispy on the outside, flaky on the inside, and packed with protein that growing children needed. The trick was stretching that expensive can of salmon as far as possible without losing the flavor. Smart cooks saved stale bread to make their own breadcrumbs, and some added mashed potatoes to make the patties even more filling. These could be served for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and children who normally avoided fish would eat these up without complaint. The patties were even better the next day, sliced cold for sandwiches or reheated in a skillet. Families learned to buy canned salmon when it went on sale, storing several cans to make this meal throughout the month. The salmon provided healthy oils and nutrients that were hard to get from other affordable sources, making this both economical and nutritious. Depression cake. No eggs, no milk, no butter. When rationing meant no eggs, no milk, and no butter, bakers discovered they could still make cake using vinegar, oil, and creativity. This cake was moist, chocolatey, and lasted for days without going stale. The secret was the chemical reaction between vinegar and baking soda, which created the bubbles that normally came from eggs. Families could make this cake for birthdays, holidays, or just when they needed something sweet to lift their spirits. The ingredients were shelf-stable, meaning they could make cake even when the icebox was empty. Children loved helping mix this cake because it was impossible to mess up. No delicate egg whites to fold or butter to cream. The cake was so moist that it didn't need frosting, though a simple powdered sugar glaze made it feel extra special. This recipe proved that celebration didn't require expensive ingredients, just the desire to create something joyful for the people you loved. Potato and onion skillet. 2 pounds of potatoes and 1 large onion could feed a family when cooked in a cast iron skillet with a little bacon fat or oil. The potatoes got crispy on the outside while staying fluffy inside, and the onions caramelized to sweet perfection. This was hearty, filling food that stuck to your ribs and kept you satisfied for hours. The key was slicing everything thin enough to cook evenly, but thick enough to have substance. Some families added whatever vegetables they had, carrots, peppers, or green beans, making this a complete meal in one pan. Children loved the crispy potato edges and would fight over who got the most. This dish was even better the next morning, reheated for breakfast and topped with an egg if the family was lucky enough to have chickens. The best part was that potatoes were cheap, stored well, and were available year-round, making this a reliable meal when other foods were scarce. Bread pudding from stale bread. Stale bread wasn't garbage. It was the foundation for a dessert that could feed the whole family using milk, eggs, and whatever sweetener was available. This pudding used every last crumb of bread that was too hard to eat, transforming it into something soft, sweet, and satisfying. The bread soaked up the custard mixture, creating a dessert that was part cake, part pudding, and completely delicious. Families learned to save bread heels and crusty ends specifically for making this treat. The pudding could be flavored with vanilla if they had it, cinnamon, or even a bit of lemon zest. Some cooks added raisins or nuts when they were available, but the basic recipe was perfect on its own. This dessert was served warm in winter and cold in summer, proving its versatility. Children looked forward to bread pudding night, knowing that even their least favorite bread crusts would become something special. Rice and beans with ham bone. A single ham bone could flavor a pot of rice and beans that fed the family for 3 days. The bones simmered all day, releasing rich flavor into the beans, while rice stretched the meal to feed more mouths. This combination provided complete protein, something families needed but couldn't always afford from meat alone. The secret was cooking the beans until they were creamy, almost falling apart, so they thickened the cooking liquid naturally. Some families added whatever vegetables they had, celery, carrots, or peppers, making each pot different but always satisfying. This meal improved with time, tasting even better on the second and third days as the flavors developed. Children learned to appreciate this simple combination, understanding that it gave them the energy they needed for school and chores. The ham bone could be used multiple times, each pot getting a little less meaty, but still flavorful enough to make the beans delicious. Tomato gravy over biscuits. When fresh meat was too expensive but the garden was producing tomatoes, families made gravy from canned tomatoes, flour, and bacon drippings. This tangy, savory gravy poured over fresh biscuits made a meal that was both filling and flavorful. The acidity of the tomatoes cut through the richness of the bacon fat, creating a balanced dish that satisfied without being heavy. The key was cooking the flour in the bacon grease until it was golden before adding the tomatoes, preventing any raw flour taste. Some cooks added a pinch of sugar to balance the acidity, while others preferred the natural tartness of the tomatoes. This gravy was different every time depending on the tomatoes used. Some days sweet and mild, other days bold and acidic. Children who normally avoided vegetables would clean their plates when this gravy was involved. The meal was quick to prepare, used ingredients most families had on hand, and provided the satisfaction of fresh bread with a flavorful topping. Fried bologna and potatoes. A single roll of bologna, sliced thick and fried with potatoes, could feed a family when meat was scarce. The bologna got crispy edges while the potatoes absorbed the flavorful drippings, creating a satisfying one-pan meal. This dish used cheap ingredients but delivered the protein and calories growing children needed. The key was slicing the bologna thick enough to get good browning, but thin enough to cook through without burning. Smart cooks cut slits in the bologna edges to prevent curling, ensuring even cooking. Some families added onions to the pan, while others kept it simple with just meat and potatoes. This meal was popular with children who might refuse other types of meat, but loved the familiar taste of bologna. The leftovers were even better the next day, sliced cold for sandwiches or reheated for breakfast with eggs. Oatmeal with molasses. A pot of oatmeal sweetened with molasses provided sustained energy that kept families going through long, hard days of work. The molasses added not just sweetness, but important minerals like iron and calcium that growing bodies needed. This breakfast cost almost nothing but delivered nutrition that expensive cereals couldn't match. The secret was cooking the oatmeal low and slow, stirring frequently to prevent burning and create a creamy texture. Some families added a pinch of salt to enhance the flavor, while others mixed in whatever fruit was available. This oatmeal was filling enough to keep children satisfied until lunch, even on the most active days. Mothers knew that starting the day with this substantial breakfast would give their families the energy they needed for school, work, and daily chores. The molasses also provided quick energy, along with the sustained energy from the oats, making this the perfect fuel for active families. Lard and sugar sandwiches. When there was no butter, no jam, and no meat, children learned to love sandwiches made with lard and sugar on white bread. The lard provided necessary fats, while the sugar gave quick energy, creating a simple treat that satisfied both hunger and sweet cravings. This wasn't just desperation food, it was comfort food that children actually enjoyed and looked forward to. The key was spreading the lard thin enough to be pleasant, but thick enough to hold the sugar. Some families had access to brown sugar, which added a molasses flavor that made the sandwich feel more special. These sandwiches were often packed for school lunches when there was nothing else available. Children didn't know they were eating poor food, they just knew it tasted good and made them feel full. The combination provided the calories and energy needed for growing bodies, proving that sometimes the simplest foods were exactly what families needed. Egg and flour dumplings in broth. When the chicken was gone but the broth remained, families made filling dumplings from flour, eggs, and water that turned thin soup into a satisfying meal. These dumplings absorbed the flavor of the broth while adding substance that made the meal filling enough for hard-working families. The key was getting the dumpling dough the right consistency, firm enough to hold together but soft enough to cook through quickly. Some cooks rolled the dumplings thin and cut them into strips, while others dropped spoonfuls directly into the simmering broth. This meal could stretch a single chicken into several days of dinners, with the dumplings making each serving more substantial. Children loved fishing the tender dumplings out of the broth, and mothers appreciated how this simple addition transformed leftover broth into a complete meal. The dumplings were satisfying in a way that plain broth never could be, providing the carbohydrates that made the meal truly filling. Fried apples with onions. When the apple barrel was getting low and the onion bin was full, smart cooks combined these unlikely partners into a side dish that complemented almost any meal. The sweetness of the apples balanced the sharpness of the onions, creating a complex flavor that elevated simple meat dishes. This combination was especially popular in fall when apples were plentiful but starting to soften. The key was cooking them slowly so the onions caramelized and the apples held their shape without turning to mush. Some families served this with pork, others with chicken, and still others ate it as a main dish with cornbread. The natural sugars in the apples provided quick energy, while the onions added vitamins and minerals. Children who normally avoided vegetables would eat the onions when they were mixed with sweet apples. This dish proved that creative combinations could turn simple ingredients into something special that satisfied both taste and nutritional needs. Milk and crackers soup. Saltine crackers crumbled into warm milk created a simple soup that filled empty stomachs when there was nothing else in the house. The crackers absorbed the milk, creating a soft, porridge-like consistency that was easy to eat and surprisingly filling. This was often the last meal before payday, when every other ingredient had been used up. The key was warming the milk just enough to soften the crackers without curdling the milk. Some families added a pinch of salt and pepper, while others preferred it plain. This soup was gentle enough for sick children, but substantial enough for healthy ones who needed calories and nutrition. Mothers knew this combination provided protein from the milk and carbohydrates from the crackers, giving children the energy they needed. The warm milk was also comforting, making this soup feel like a hug in a bowl during difficult times. Pinto bean and cornbread casserole. Dried pinto beans cooked with onions and topped with cornbread batter created a complete meal that fed the whole family for under $1. The beans provided protein while the cornbread added carbohydrates, creating a combination that kept families full and satisfied. This casserole was easy to prepare, requiring minimal attention once it went in the oven. The key was cooking the beans until they were tender before adding the cornbread topping, ensuring both elements were perfectly cooked. Some families added a bit of bacon or ham for extra flavor, while others kept it simple, with just onions and seasonings. This dish was even better the next day, when the flavors had time to develop and meld together. Children loved the combination of creamy beans and slightly sweet cornbread, making this a meal that satisfied both parents and kids. The casserole provided complete nutrition at a fraction of the cost of meat-based meals. Tomato soup cake. The Campbell Soup Company never intended their condensed tomato soup to become a cake ingredient, but creative home bakers during the 1930s discovered that the thick, sweet soup created incredibly moist spice cakes that lasted for days without drying out. This unusual combination worked because tomato soup contained sugar, spices, and moisture, everything needed for a tender cake. Mixed with flour, baking soda, and warm spices like cinnamon and cloves, the soup transformed into a rich, reddish cake that tasted nothing like tomatoes. The natural acidity in tomatoes helped activate the baking soda, creating a perfect rise, while the concentrated flavors added complexity that expensive spices couldn't match. Families could make this cake for the cost of a single can of soup plus basic pantry ingredients. Yet guests always asked for the recipe, amazed by the sophisticated flavor. The cake improved with age, becoming more moist and flavorful after a day or two, making it perfect for families who needed their desserts to last through the week. Oatmeal meatloaf. When ground beef became too expensive for large families, clever cooks learned to stretch small amounts of meat with rolled oats, creating hearty meatloaves that satisfied even the hungriest appetites. The oats absorbed flavors and juices, making every bite taste meaty and satisfying. This technique allowed families to feed 8 people with just 1 pound of ground beef by adding 2 cups of rolled oats, eggs, and seasonings. The oats provided bulk and nutrition while absorbing the meat's flavors during cooking, creating a texture that was both familiar and filling. Mixed with diced onions, breadcrumbs, and milk, the loaf held together perfectly and sliced cleanly for sandwiches the next day. Many families discovered they actually preferred this version to all meat loaves because the oats made it more tender and prevented it from becoming dry or tough. The recipe became so popular that some families continued making it long after they could afford more meat, simply because it tasted better and fed more people for less money. Chocolate gravy. In Appalachian communities where breakfast often consisted of nothing but biscuits, resourceful cooks created chocolate gravy, a sweet cocoa-based sauce that transformed plain bread into a dessert-like meal that satisfied both hunger and the natural craving for something sweet. This simple mixture of cocoa powder, flour, sugar, and milk cooked into a thick pudding-like consistency that could be poured over biscuits, toast, or even eaten with a spoon. The cocoa provided flavor and the illusion of richness, while flour thickened the mixture into something substantial enough to be filling. Families would make large batches on Sunday mornings, serving it as a special breakfast treat that used ingredients they could afford. Children looked forward to chocolate gravy mornings, never realizing they were eating poor food. They simply knew they were getting something sweet and satisfying. The recipe spread throughout rural communities where families understood that making children happy didn't require expensive ingredients, just creativity and love. Pickle soup. Polish immigrants brought this unusual recipe to America, but it gained popularity during the Depression when families needed to use every scrap of food, including the brine from pickle jars. This tangy, hearty soup transformed leftover pickle juice into a satisfying meal that warmed families through cold winters. The soup started with the sour liquid from dill pickle jars, which provided both flavor and the acidic base for a rich broth. Families would add diced potatoes, onions, and any leftover meat or sausage they had, creating a filling soup that cost almost nothing to make. The pickle brine gave the soup a distinctive tang that children either loved or learned to tolerate, while the potatoes provided bulk and nutrition. Some families added sour cream when they could afford it, creating a richer version that felt like a special meal. The recipe used ingredients that most families would have thrown away, turning waste into sustenance. This soup became a symbol of immigrant resourcefulness, showing that good food could come from the most unexpected sources. Butterbean casserole. During the 1940s, when meat was rationed and expensive, Southern families turned to butter beans as their primary protein source. This hearty casserole combined dried lima beans with onions, seasonings, and whatever small amount of meat or fat they could spare, creating a filling dish that fed large families. The beans were soaked overnight, then slow cooked with diced onions, a small piece of salt pork or bacon, and seasonings until they became creamy and tender. The long cooking process allowed the beans to absorb all the flavors, while the small amount of meat provided enough richness to make the dish satisfying. Families would layer the cooked beans in casserole dishes, top them with breadcrumbs or cornbread crumbs, and bake until golden. The result was a protein-rich meal that cost a fraction of what meat would have cost, but kept everyone full and satisfied. Many families served this as their Sunday dinner, proud to offer guests something hearty and delicious despite their limited resources. The casserole could be stretched with additional vegetables or grains, making it adaptable to whatever ingredients were available. Bone broth soup. When families couldn't afford fresh meat, they learned to extract maximum nutrition from bones that butchers often gave away for free. This rich, gelatinous broth became the foundation for countless meals that provided essential nutrients and satisfied hunger with minimal cost. Beef, pork, or chicken bones were simmered for hours until they released their collagen, minerals, and any remaining meat particles into the water. The resulting broth was rich enough to serve as soup on its own, or it could be used as the base for vegetable soups, gravies, or stews. Families would add whatever vegetables they had: onions, carrots, celery, potatoes, creating filling meals that cost almost nothing but provided complete nutrition. The long cooking process extracted calcium and other minerals from the bones, while the gelatin provided protein that helped people feel satisfied longer. Many families kept a perpetual pot simmering on their stoves, adding new bones and vegetables as they became available. This practice turned waste products into liquid gold that nourished entire families through the hardest times. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes. This dish saved more families during the Great Depression than any government program ever could. When paychecks were small and bellies were empty, mothers across America knew they could stretch a single pound of ground beef to feed 6 hungry mouths. The magic happened in a heavy skillet where beef was browned until every bit of fat rendered out. Then flour was stirred in to create a roux that would make French chefs jealous. The secret wasn't in expensive ingredients, it was in patience. Grandma would slowly add milk, stirring constantly to prevent lumps, creating a rich gravy that could coat every spoon. Salt, pepper, and maybe a dash of Worcestershire if the family was feeling fancy. Served over mountains of mashed potatoes made from 5-pound bags bought in bulk, this meal could fill stomachs and warm hearts, even when the future looked uncertain. Children would clean their plates and ask for seconds, never knowing they were eating poor food. To them, it was just delicious. Tuna noodle casserole. Every American kitchen once knew the magic of combining canned tuna, egg noodles, and cream of mushroom soup into something greater than its humble parts. This casserole ruled supreme during the 1950s and 60s, when families needed hearty meals that could stretch ingredients and feed hungry mouths without breaking the bank. The dish emerged from the Great Depression era's philosophy of making do with what you had, but it found its golden age in post-war suburbia. Mothers would layer the mixture with crushed potato chips on top, creating a satisfying crunch that made children forget they were eating something economical. The beauty lay in its simplicity. No fancy techniques required, just honest ingredients transformed into comfort food that could feed a family of 6 for under $2. Old school goulash, American chop suey. Every neighborhood had that one family who made goulash differently, and every family swore their version was the only real way to make it. This wasn't the Hungarian paprika-heavy version that purists might recognize. This was American survival cooking at its finest. Ground beef, elbow macaroni, and whatever vegetables were about to go bad in the icebox. The beauty of goulash was its flexibility. Got some bell peppers that are getting soft? Throw them in. Onions that are sprouting? Perfect. A can of tomatoes that's been sitting in the pantry? Essential. The ground beef was browned first, then everything else joined the party in one big pot. No fancy techniques required, just patience and the wisdom to let everything cook together until the flavors married into something greater than the sum of its parts. Kids loved it because it was basically hamburger and pasta in one bowl. Parents loved it because it used up leftovers and stretched ingredients further than they had any right to go. A pot of goulash could feed the family for 2 days, taste better as leftovers, and cost less than a single restaurant meal today. Chicken pot pie. Before rotisserie chickens lined grocery store shelves, families made chicken pot pie from scratch using every part of the bird. The process began on Sunday mornings when whole chickens simmered in large pots, filling homes with the rich aroma that promised something special for dinner. The resulting broth became the foundation for a thick, creamy filling studded with tender chicken, carrots, peas, and potatoes. What made these pies extraordinary wasn't just the filling, it was the homemade crust that required skill passed down from mother to daughter. Rolling out pastry dough in sweltering summer kitchens was an act of love as mothers endured the heat to create golden brown tops that shattered at first bite. Each family guarded their secret ingredients, whether it was a dash of sage, a splash of sherry, or the perfect ratio of vegetables to meat. Sloppy Joe pie. When regular sloppy joes weren't fancy enough for Sunday dinner, but the budget couldn't handle a real roast, creative cooks invented the sloppy Joe pie. This clever dish took the familiar flavors of the sandwich filling and dressed them up with a cornbread topping that made everything feel more special. The base started like any good sloppy joe. Ground beef browned with onions, then seasoned with ketchup, Worcestershire sauce, and a touch of brown sugar for that sweet tangy flavor kids couldn't resist. But instead of piling it on hamburger buns, the mixture went into a casserole dish and got topped with cornbread batter made from a simple box mix or scratch ingredients. As it baked, something magical happened. The cornbread rose and turned golden while absorbing just enough of the beef juices to stay moist and flavorful. The result looked like a proper dinner that could grace any table, even when unexpected company showed up. Served with a simple salad or canned green beans, this dish could make any family feel like they were dining in style, regardless of what was actually in the bank account. Scalloped potatoes? The art of layering thin potato slices with cream and seasonings created one of America's most beloved side dishes. Every church potluck, family reunion, and holiday table featured at least one casserole dish of golden, bubbling scalloped potatoes. The technique seemed simple, but required skill, slicing potatoes uniformly thin, creating a roux that wouldn't break, and achieving that perfect balance between tender potatoes and crispy top. Families often added their signature touches. Some included ham or bacon, others layered in cheese, and a few adventurous cooks added herbs from their gardens. The slow baking process filled homes with the comforting aroma of cream and potatoes, creating anticipation that made the wait worthwhile. What made these potatoes special wasn't complexity, but the time and care invested in their preparation. Chipwreck Casserole. The name tells you everything you need to know about this recipe. It was born from desperation and whatever happened to be in the pantry. When grocery money ran out before payday, mothers would survey their kitchens and create miracles from seemingly nothing. Chipwreck Casserole became legendary because it combined the irresistible crunch of potato chips with hearty ground beef in a way that made everyone forget they were eating leftovers. Ground beef was stretched with whatever vegetables were available, often canned corn, green beans, or diced tomatoes. The mixture was seasoned with onion soup mix, a pantry staple that added flavor without fresh ingredients, and maybe a can of cream soup to bind everything together. The magic happened on top, where crushed potato chips created a golden, crunchy layer that children would fight over. This dish proved that sometimes the best recipes come from having no choice but to be creative. Families would request it even during better times because it tasted like childhood, like making do, like the satisfaction of turning nothing into something delicious. The name stuck because everyone knew what it meant. Good food made from whatever didn't get wrecked in your kitchen. Chicken a la king. Chicken a la king represented the height of 1950s, entertaining elegance, transforming leftover chicken into a creamy, sophisticated dish that impressed guests and satisfied families. The dish typically featured chunks of tender chicken, colorful bell peppers, and pimientos suspended in a rich cream sauce that was spooned over toast points, rice, or biscuits. Its origins traced back to fancy hotel restaurants, but home cooks adapted it for their own kitchens, making it accessible while maintaining its air of refinement. The key to perfect chicken a la king lay in the sauce, a careful balance of chicken stock, cream, and seasonings that coated each ingredient without overwhelming the delicate flavors. Many families served it for Sunday dinners or when entertaining, as it could be prepared ahead and kept warm, allowing hosts to spend time with their guests rather than slaving over the stove. Beef and biscuit ring. Sunday dinners called for something that looked special, even when the budget was tight. The beef and biscuit ring solved this problem by taking ordinary ground beef and presenting it in a way that looked like holiday fare. This dish became a favorite because it impressed guests while using ingredients that cost almost nothing. The beef mixture was straightforward, ground beef browned with onions and seasoned with whatever was available. Sometimes cream of mushroom soup was added for richness, or a packet of onion soup mix for extra flavor. The magic was in the presentation. Refrigerated biscuit dough was arranged in a ring around the outside of a round baking dish. Then the beef mixture was spooned into the center. As it baked, the biscuits rose and turned golden brown, creating an impressive crown around the savory filling. When brought to the table, it looked like something from a fancy cookbook, but everyone knew it was just good old-fashioned comfort food dressed up for company. Children loved pulling apart the individual biscuits and dipping them in the beef mixture, making dinner interactive and fun even during the hardest times. Lemon icebox pie. Before refrigeration became universal, icebox pies represented the height of summer dessert sophistication, requiring careful planning and the luxury of cold storage. Lemon icebox pie perfectly captured summer's bright flavors in a cool, creamy dessert that provided relief from sweltering heat. The filling combined tart lemon juice with sweetened condensed milk and eggs, creating a custard-like texture that set without baking. The graham cracker crust added textural contrast and complemented the lemon's brightness with subtle sweetness. What made these pies special was their make-ahead nature. They actually improved after sitting overnight, allowing flavors to meld and the texture to achieve perfect consistency. Families often served them at Sunday dinners or special occasions, proud to offer guests something that required both skill and advanced planning. The first bite delivered an explosion of lemony freshness that epitomized summer's best flavors. Beef jambalaya bake. Rice was cheap, filling, and could absorb flavors like nobody's business. When Southern families needed to stretch their ground beef further, they turned to dishes like this beef jambalaya bake that transformed a small amount of meat into a feast. This wasn't authentic Louisiana jambalaya. It was survival cooking that borrowed flavors from wherever they worked. The dish started with browning ground beef and onions, then adding rice, canned tomatoes, and whatever seasonings were available. Paprika gave it color and a hint of smokiness, while garlic powder and cayenne pepper added depth without requiring fresh ingredients. Chicken broth, when available, made the rice extra flavorful, but water worked just fine when money was tight. Everything went into a casserole dish and baked until the rice was tender and had absorbed all the liquid. The result was a complete meal in one dish. Protein, starch, and vegetables all combined into something that tasted exotic and special. Families could eat this for days, and it actually improved with time as the flavors melded together. It was proof that good food didn't require expensive ingredients, just creativity and patience. Beans and franks. Saturday night often meant beans and franks, a hearty combination that satisfied hungry families while requiring minimal preparation and cost. The dish typically featured canned baked beans enhanced with sliced hot dogs, then baked until the flavors melted and the top developed a slight caramelization. Many families had their own secret additions, some stirred in brown sugar and mustard for deeper flavor. Others added onions or bell peppers for texture and nutrition. The slow baking process allowed the hot dogs to release their flavor into the beans while developing slightly crispy edges that added textural interest. This dish represented the practical side of American cooking, where convenience foods were enhanced with homemade touches to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Despite its humble nature, beans and franks were beloved comfort food that brought families together around the dinner table. Mock prime rib patties. The name was pure marketing genius. Calling anything prime rib made it sound expensive and special, even when it was made from the cheapest cut of meat available. These patties were designed to fool both the eye and the palate, creating the illusion of luxury when there was none to be had. The secret was in the seasoning and presentation. Ground beef was mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, and a careful blend of spices that included garlic powder, onion powder, and sometimes a touch of soy sauce for that umami richness. The patties were shaped thicker than regular hamburgers and seared in a hot skillet to create a good crust, then finished in the oven to ensure they cooked evenly throughout. What really sold the illusion was the gravy, a rich brown sauce made from the pan drippings that tasted like it came from an expensive roast. Served with mashed potatoes and whatever vegetables were affordable, these patties made families feel like they were dining on the finest cuts of beef. Children grew up thinking their mothers were miracle workers, never knowing that love and creativity were the only expensive ingredients in the recipe. Salsbury Steak. Before frozen TV dinners made this dish a pale imitation of itself, Salsbury Steak was a masterpiece of stretching meat into something special. Named after Dr. James Salisbury, who believed in the power of beef for good health, this recipe became a staple because it made 1 pound of ground beef look and taste like expensive steaks. The trick was in the binding. Breadcrumbs, egg, and a splash of milk transformed ordinary ground beef into individual portions that looked substantial on the plate. Shaped by hand into oval patties, these were pan-fried until golden brown, then set aside while onions cooked down into sweet, caramelized perfection. The gravy was built right in the same pan, using the beef drippings and flour to create a rich brown sauce that made everything taste like Sunday dinner. Smart housewives would make extra patties and freeze them for quick meals later in the week. The children thought they were getting steak for dinner, and in a way, they were, just not the kind that came from the butcher's expensive cuts. This was working-class steak, made with love and necessity in equal measure.